Okay, well, let's press on, and I will troubleshoot that tomorrow morning and see if I can fix it. Um, if you would, before you leave tonight, mark on your sheet if you can get in, or mark on the attendance sheet if you can get into it or not, and
Into SQL.
into the SQL developer, yeah. And one of the things I may, in fact, here, Lee, pass that around. One of the things I may do is reset the look, uh, or reset the snapshot back to the beginning of the semester, and I don't think anybody will lose much. If I do that, I may try and put the PDF printer in there so you guys can have PDF. We'll see. All right. You'll notice starting in chapter 3, there starts to be a more distinguished difference between Oracle and Access Code. Punctuation is important. You'll notice that some of the things that SQL does, SQL for Oracle does not do, or Access does something totally different. So you need to be aware of that. Um, Again, what we're doing as we're going through this textbook is to ignore the Access. We're looking at the Oracle and trying to make it work once we get Oracle to work. So we'll get there. Okay, punctuation examples. These we have looked at before, and we talked about back in chapter 2, select first name as first name. We'd set it off in double quote marks. Lee.
You're not recording.
Yes, I am.
It doesn't show the flashing green bars.
This is the new version. They told me I wouldn't have flashing green bars
On Camtasia.
on Camtasia. Right there, we are recording.
Okay.
Ugh. Sorry about that. At least that's what they tell me. Okay, supplier's name, like, remember we're going to use percent signs if we want to look at something with numbers or letters on either side. Hire date, in this case, here's an example where we've used a reserved word, but we put an underbar to define it with the word, or add the word hire. And notice when we go for a date, we use the Oracle default. Single quotes, the day, dash, 3-character month, dash, a 4-character year. And that's what we're going to get when we start working with the dates. Double dashes is a comment in Oracle. We talked just before we took the break about using multiple entities when we write our queries. So one of the ways that we can identify that entity is to put the attribute name, dot, and then the entity name. So in this case, I said that backwards, I'm sorry. The entity name dot the attribute name. So we use L underbar employees, which is the table or the entity, dot, and then the first name that we're looking at. We'll also find out, I think in chapter 4, where we can even create aliases for the different entities we're using in a select statement, and that works very well. And the double pipe means we're going to combine two attributes together when we run our query.
That's not an OR.
Pardon me?
That's not an OR.
That is not an OR. All right. Now, in the query on the left, you can see I put in first name, double pipe, last name as first and last name. Of course, that part's set off in quotation marks. And you see what it does. If you don't tell Oracle to put the spaces in, it'll run everything together. So if we want to put that space in, we're going to use first name double bar, single quote, a space mark, another single quote, another double bar, then as our alias, and that time we get Susan Brown with the space in between Susan and Brown. So these are just some of the things that we can do to dress up the reports that we might run out of the query builder. We've also looked at this. Remember back in chapter 1, select asterisk is a wild card. That'll select everything. Select count. Count is not a reserved word that we've looked at yet, but select count parentheses asterisk is going to count every record in the database. Please don't do, when we start using the census, what somebody did a year or so ago, and they decided to do select count for a 500 million record database. Took about 25 minutes for it to count all the records. So trust me when I tell you how many records there are. There are times I'm not a firm believer, or I am not a believer in documenting within your code everything that goes on, but I do like to put comments in, and notice the way here on bullet 3 that we can use a comment, a forward slash, an asterisk, and then you write your comment, and that can extend over multiple lines, and Oracle will interpret it as a comment until it comes up with an asterisk and the forward slash a second time. So if you want to put notes to yourself within the code, this is a very good way to do it. Very easy to do. And of course, where last name equals single quote, %Q, % single quote, that's going to give us any last name that has a Q anywhere in the name. Okay, kind of a review from last week. The count function, by the way, we haven't really used that yet, but the count function, when you run it, select, count, asterisk, and from, this is the result that you'll get. And this operates in about 1/100th of a second, I believe, because we're working with a very small database. Case sensitivity, Oracle is case sensitive. Now, in the code, that's not necessarily true. Because I can type my from as all lowercase, I can type it as all uppercase, but when we start to look at qualifiers on our where statements or our select statements, then it's going to be case sensitive. There are two ways to get around that. And if you work with a large database day in and day out, you'll start to realize that sometimes, even though you say first and last names will always be put in uppercase letters, that data person that's doing your data entry that yesterday was saying, do you want fries with that, won't always follow the instructions. And so one of the ways around that is to use a where or select clause that uses the modifier upper. And so what that'll do is take the results of every first name and turn that result into uppercase before it takes a look at the value to find out if it's equal or not. So that's one way to do it. Another option is to do lowercase. And regardless of how that name's recorded, if the name was uppercase J, lower O, H, and N, it would turn everything into lower. All right, so we have two different options there. The key is to be consistent with the data entry. And if you have ultimate control over the database and you're the only one that's making that data entry, you can do that. However, if you're working in a company that has maybe 30 or 40 people working in data analysis and data entry, they're going to slip. They're going to put the data in wrong unless you build a program will look at that in advanced database, unless you get in and build a program where you check what's being entered into the database, pardon me, uh, and then reject it if it's not entered correctly. And we'll look at masking when we get into the advanced database function. You want to make it look pretty for reports. End users may not understand name underbar first, or may not like it that way. It's much easier for us to create an alias as quotation marks first space name, quotation marks. They may like that better. Now, there's a group that will say, the heck with that, they're the end user, they'll get what they want. Be aware, if it wasn't for that end user, then I don't care who you are in databases, you wouldn't have a job. So you got to keep that end user happy. I'm here to tell you there are a lot of database organizations that don't feel that way, and they don't work with the end user. But those are the people that are eventually paying the money. You can go back as short as 3 or 4 years ago. Federal government dumped over $1 billion into a database program to replace the logistics program that was running that tracked parts. The developer didn't listen to the end user, and now they're being gone after for the federal government for wasting $1 billion. I doubt they'll ever collect, but the key is we've got to know what that end user wants as we work on our programs. Okay, we've got 3 logic values, very, very simple. Is it true, is it false, or is it neither? All right, and remember, null is a total absence of data. There is nothing there. So you can look at a null, you can select a null, but all it means is there is an absence of data. So if we look at a true, we can look at this code. This is out of section 14, and we look at a select from foods where the price increase is greater than 20 cents and we're ordering it by menu. This would be a true statement. All right, if we want to do it as a false, we'd throw in a not. Okay, where not price increase greater than 20 cents, order by menu. Again, where we put our parentheses is very important. And you can see the difference in the example as we run it. We get obviously a couple of different examples. This one is our null, and we've talked about null a good part of this evening. Again, I can't stress enough, people get confused. Null is a total absence of data. If we were back in the days when I gave multiple choice questions in Oracle along with the lab work, that would be one of the questions. What does null represent? And you'd be amazed at the number of people that used to say null equals 0. No, it doesn't. It equals a total absence of data. Error messages. Don't trust what you see on the screen. I'll show you an example in a second. At this point, again, remember, Oracle hates you. The only thing it hates more than you is Microsoft Windows and Bill Gates. So don't trust what you see on the screen. We'll see that in a second. When you develop your own code, review it. Have a plan for how you're going to enter it. I've talked to you about how I enter my code. I like to select the entities first, then I'll run the select statement, and finally I'll add the conditional clauses, the where clauses, the nots, and so on and so forth. That works for me. I've used that for the past 27 years, and it's worked. But that may not work for you. That may not make sense for you. So develop what you feel comfortable with in entering your code, and that'll work really well.
You
you can type in from and the attributes, and then you can type in select, but select, it always has to be select, from, and then the conditions. Yes, absolutely correct. Okay, I can't stress enough, start simple. If you've got a very, very detailed problem or program to write, Jim Romani and I started with a very simple select statement, and then we added to it until we got up to a nest that was 5 pages long. I confess, I bailed out at the end of page 4. I was getting too big a headache, but start simple, build on that code. Make sure you're getting what you need when you run your query. If you're really stumped, have somebody look at your code. Teaching this class for the past 14 years, 90% of the time with people starting off in Oracle, you've made a punctuation error somewhere. And we'll look at one of the most common ones coming up. I think I had you turn the line numbers on. Half of us can't check, but I think I had you turn the line numbers on the editor. I'll show you again here in a second how to do that, but that kind of helps you reference, especially if you're doing peer reviews and looking at each other's code. And that's an event we'll do a little bit later in the semester. Quick review, if you want to look at the different options that you have to set up your editor when you can get back into it, you want to go to Tools and Preferences and go through sometime and take a look at the environment, take a look at the database, how the compiler's running, but what you're looking for specifically is the line gutter under the editor, and make sure that that top one is checked so you can turn on your line numbers, and it'll help you as you run through your code quite a bit. Here's what I mean about don't trust what Oracle tells you when there's an error. This shows an error at line 97, column 1. You look at line 97 and column 1, and that line's written correctly. What it's telling you is that no, it's not written correctly because you put a comma after the last attribute that you selected. And when Oracle sees select and commas, it will expect to see after a comma another attribute. And so it knows that the from is a reserved word, so that can't be an attribute, so you got an error at line 97, when actually the error is before and the comma. You take the comma out of line 96 and that error goes away. It works very simply. And there it is right there if you can't see it. Okay, only our light condition supports wildcard characters. And it can't get any simpler than that. Everything else we're going to have to include what we want in there. I was going to have you do something on SQL and work through a little bit of a query where we start simple and build, but there's no use doing that if not everybody has a code. So, any questions? All right, I will fix or reinstall your developers tomorrow morning, and it should work. If Roy and I run into problems, I will send you an email to your student account and let you know that we haven't got it fixed yet.
I don't know what that is, student account.
You go into Gmail,
I don't use Gmail.
you'll go into Gmail and it is your first name dash last name at raider.rose.edu.
Look in the student handbook, it'll show you how to do it. That's the way the college wants us to communicate with you.
And the default password will be the birth date.
Yes, it
Yeah.
will.
Like it was on the other.
Yeah.
Until you change it.
And it'll tell you that in your student handbook. And you can fight it, leave, but you won't win. If you want to send me your email, I'll try and list it. But if Rose State needs to get a hold of you for something, they'll send it to your student email.
And you can go into Gmail and you can forward it to
Yep,
their address.
and you can forward it, absolutely
Because
correct.
mine is forwarded.
Yeah.
I will
Yeah.
never check that email address.
And you can get to, you don't have to go into Gmail to get to it, you get to it off of D12.
Yeah, D2L works. There are several different ways to get to it.
But that's where your snow notices and everything are gonna go to.
And since they've actually thrown the student mail over to Gmail, it seems to work fairly well. But some people don't want to use it, just be aware of the consequences. Any other questions?
I have one that's not on topic.
Okay.
What IDE, when you're doing Python, what IDE do you use?
I use PyCharm, and it's recommended by MIT. It's if you look at their logo, it looks a little hokey. But one of the reasons I like it, it's got a debug function. It'll let you turn on line numbers where a lot of the other ones won't. It will run your script for you right on the screen without turning off the code. So I kind of like it. I talked to the guys up at MIT before I selected my book, and I went with one that they had written that's free. And I'm supposed to be teaching scripting, but the guy before me didn't teach him Python, so I got to teach him Python before I can teach him scripting.
The problem is
Oh.